Welcome to Cozy Costume Creations. I'm Sarah Beth, and I'm going to teach you how to do horsehair braid strips that you put into hats, and then you use bobby pins to then attach them to somebody's hair. So that's how you get a perching hat to sit on your head, like this one. It's one of a few ways. I've also used toupee clips for that. Those are really great. And then there's a different method of horsehair braid loops that I use pretty frequently too. I'm going to teach you one method. This is a hat I made for my film, A Shattered Soul. So that's what I'm going to use as the example. So yeah, let's get started. All right, so I've got my 1-inch wide horsehair braid right here, right? So yeah, I am cutting about 3-inch strips, and I'm cutting 4 here, but I'm only going to use 2 in this hat. That's about how many I usually use, but it really depends on the hat. Usually just 1 in the right side and 1 in the left. You can do 1 in front as well, 1 in back. Sometimes I'll just have like the whole thing be a strip of horsehair, and that gives the hair and makeup artist a lot of space to attach it to the wig or the hair of the actress or actor. So what I'm doing is I've got my silamide thread, I'm threading my needle, and we're gonna wrap around the edges, because again, the stuff frays out, so really the first thing we have to do is kind of finish off these edges. And the first way we do this is we wrap the thread around, but if you just wrap it, then of course it's going to just unravel, right? So I wrap it around, and then I have my needle go through the center of it, and I pull, and then I do the same thing again, another wrappy wrap, and then up through the center. So I'm creating these stitches that are anchoring that wrap around in place, right? So I'm just kind of wrapping and stitching around the edges, and you do this around, all of the edges, and you do it pretty close to them, but not too close, because I'm gonna, have my lighter up close to that in a few minutes. So I want to give myself a little bit of space, but not too much, right? Have to do the thread wrapping and the melting, because if you only melt it in place, then like the melting isn't strong enough for it to like not break. And so like melting those edges fibers, like they'll break out eventually, right? So you need the thread to wrap it in place, and then you need to melt those fibers so that they, don't fray out. So you can't only melt, right? You have to have the thread wrap as well. If you only do the thread wrap, then, you haven't finished those edges, and they're going to fray out, and it just like looks tacky and gross, and it's just not good craftsmanship, and you got these extra fibers that are sticking out and are scratchy. So you have to do both, right? A little bit of a side note of how do you determine which method you want to use for attaching a hat to somebody's head. What I do is I like to collaborate and ask my hair and makeup artists what method they prefer, because they're the ones that are actually going to be attaching this hat every night to the actor or actress's head. So I like to ask them, hey, what's easiest for you? What's best for you? Especially when there are quick changes, like some of them are like, this method is so much faster. So this is my preferred method because this is the preferred method of the makeup artists I typically work with. And they really like this method, especially for quick changes. So that's why I do this. And also, yeah, make sure you're collaborating. So you can see that what we're doing is we're just trying to finish these edges, right? So this stitching, and then the next step where I melt the edges, these are just steps to like finish these edges, because the horsehair braid frays out like the dickens, right? So I have to prevent that. If you skip this step, either of these steps, if you skip either this thread part or the melting, you're kind of screwed. Like, this stuff is going to fray out, and it is not going to be in your hat for very long, and then it's going to fall out, and it's going to be a mess. So do it right the first time so you don't have to do it twice. Yeah, so let's move on to melting the edges. All right, so I do this by my sink if I'm going to do it multiple times, just in case, something, my threads catch on fire or something. What I like to do is I like to grab my curved pliers and hold it in place, and this way I can control the flame so it doesn't melt past that, right? And then I can hold it and get a better look at it. And then I use my pliers to kind of clamp down on it so I get this flattened look, right? So now those edges are all melted together and they're kind of clamped in place, which is really nice. So now I have like a beautiful finished edge. So I'm going to do that one more time. I clamp it with my pliers, and then do a little melty, pull it off while it's still kind of liquidy, and then I use that to kind of clamp it to flatten it. And then I have two beautiful finished edges, right? There we go, nice melted, and then we've got, our thread that's all wrapped around all nicely. And now I have a finished strip, and that's what I sew in, right? So then I take the inside of my hat, and then I just sew it in on the sides. I will note super fast, I made this at home, so I didn't have all access to all the chemicals I usually use. So usually what I do is, you can see how the inner lining is looking kind of floppy. Usually is I would actually spray an adhesive on the inside to keep the inner lining attached to the top of the hat. So just a note of something I do professionally, but that I don't do at home because I don't store chemicals at home. So yeah, so on this, I'm doing it on the sides. So you see this is a teardrop shaped hat. So the teardrop is the front point of the hat. And what you do is you just do basically you do a tack. So you tack these in place. And you do it, close to the brim, but where they're hidden in the lining, right? So it's totally in the lining and not on the brim or the crown, but kind of in the in-between space, right? But accessible, so it could be easily just kind of pulled down so it can be attached to your hair. And we just do it on one side and then the other, and then the point, and you sit it flat up against it, right? So it's going to sit nice and flat up against the edge of the hat, right? And then because it's got that braid, it can be, it's got a little bit of movement so you can pull it, right? So I've done one side. I'm preparing to tack the other side in. But yeah, so I'm going to go to the other side and then just stitch this one in. And yeah, I just stitch one side in with a tacking it and then swap to the other side. And yeah, you see how the one I stitched is just sitting flat in there, you couldn't even tell it was there, right? So it doesn't stick out. It just sits flat, which is another advantage to this method, because when you make the loops, rather than this kind of flat strip, the loops are just a bit bulkier and they stick out more. So this is a very nice, very invisible method too. Alrighty, right. Alright, so you can see what I'm doing here is I am stitching through the lining layer, but I'm also catching the fa shape. Not every stitch, some of them I'm just going through the lining, but I am anchoring this so that it's strong. If I catch only the lining, this is going to be floppy, but you can see there are a few stitches here and there where I'm going through the fa shape, and those are a little bit harder to get through, and so that's a strong anchor, right? So you can go through all of the layers of the lining, the fa shape, and then the outside layer as well. If you do that though, you're going to have outside stitches, and you want to cover those with flowers or a hat band or something. So you just need to think about how many layers you need to go through to make it secure and also invisible. How are you going to make it both? These are just some things to think about. For example, if this were a heavier hat, or if the actor is going to go on stage and do a backflip, I might want to go through all layers, right? So, think about the circumstances of what you're making this for, and that'll determine a lot of the choices you make, right? So you can see how this is both an invisible method and also very easy for then the makeup artist to just kind of pull it down a little bit, grab some of the hair with the bobby pin, and then grab the horsehair braid with it, right? Usually what I've seen is makeup artists tend to do an X bobby pin because that's really secure. So they do one going one way diagonally and one the other way, creating an X, and that holds the hat to the hair securely. So that's what this is for. Also, I want to note this is not actual horsehair. There were no horses involved in this. It is a synthetic fiber, as you saw it melted, in protein fibers, which come from animals and humans. Obviously do not melt, they burn, right? So no protein fibers, purely synthetic. So this is done. Here we have it. Yay, yay, yay. A hat that can now be put on. And there it is. So that's how I attach this to my hair. And I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. And I'll see you later. Bye!